I never imagined I would be the kind of person to walk away from my family. Growing up, family was everything, the sacred bond, a source of unconditional love and support. But life, as I have painfully learned, doesn't always follow the script we expect. Sometimes, the ties that bind us become chains that hold us down, and breaking free becomes a matter of survival. For years, I buried my feelings under layers of obligation and guilt. I played the role of the dutiful child, the supportive sibling, the devoted parent, the loyal spouse. I sacrificed my dreams, my peace of mind, and ultimately, my sense of self to keep the family together. But the harder I tried to hold it all, the more it slipped through my fingers. The cracks began as whispers in the silence, resentments unspoken, needs unmet, wounds ignored. My family was not perfect, no family is. But what hurt the most was the expectation that I would always put their happiness above my own. That I would be the glue, the fixer, the one who never faltered. At first, I convinced myself that this was love, as selfless, enduring, and wavering. But deep down, I was drowning. I remember the nights I lay awake, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I lost myself. The exhaustion was bone deep, the loneliness unbearable, even surrounded by people who were supposed to love me. I was invisible in plain sight, my voice muffled by the noise of others' needs. The turning point came slowly, almost imperceptibly. A look in the mirror that no longer reflected the person I recognized. The breaking point was a quiet realization: I could no longer keep living for others at the expense of my own soul. I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to leave. It wasn't a dramatic exit, no shouting matches or last-minute confrontations. It was a quiet, painful unraveling of the life I knew, a letting go of expectations and old roles. I packed my bags, not just with clothes, but with the weight of years of sacrifice and silence. Walking away from my family felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave. I questioned myself endlessly. Was I selfish? Was I abandoning those who needed me? Would I ever be forgiven? But beneath the guilt was a small flicker of hope, a hope that I could find myself again. The first weeks were the hardest. The silence in my new home was deafening. The absence of familiar faces was a ghostly presence. But slowly, that silence became a canvas for healing. I started to rediscover who I was beneath the layers of caretaker and martyr. I explored passions long forgotten, painting, writing, even dancing alone in my living room. I made friends who saw me, not as a family role, but as a whole person. I learned to say no without shame, to set boundaries without fear. Leaving my family didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I cared for myself enough to prioritize my well-being. It meant recognizing that love is not about losing yourself in others, but about finding a way to be whole, even if that means walking a different path. People often ask if I miss them, if I regret my decision. The truth is, I do miss parts of my family, the laughter, the shared memories, the moments of genuine connection. But I don't regret leaving, because staying would have meant losing myself completely. I'm okay with walking away because I finally understand that sometimes, love means letting go. Letting go of guilt, of obligation, of roles that no longer serve us. Letting go to create space for growth, healing, and authenticity. Today, I live a life that is true to me. It's not perfect, there are still challenges and moments of loneliness. But it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, I am at peace. Leaving my family was the hardest choice I ever made, but it was also the most freeing. And for that, I am okay. The first few months after I left, I was caught in a swirl of emotions: grief, relief, fear, and a strange kind of liberation. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I had been so defined by my family roles: daughter, sister, wife, mother, that without those titles, I felt unmoored. The silence in my apartment sometimes felt suffocating, but it was also the first time I truly heard my own thoughts. I started journaling, pouring out everything I had buried for years. The resentment toward expectations, the exhaustion of always being the peacemaker, the heartbreak of feeling unseen and unheard. Writing was like a balm for my wounded spirit. It gave me a way to untangle the knots inside me and face the parts of myself I had been too afraid to acknowledge. Therapy became a lifeline. Sitting across from a stranger who listened without judgment, who helped me entangle the complex web of family dynamics, was both terrifying and healing. I learned that my family's dysfunction wasn't my fault, even though I had been made to feel responsible for everything. I learned about boundaries, how to set them and respect them. For the first time, I understood that self-care isn't selfish, it's essential. I remember one particular session when I broke down completely. I confessed how guilty I felt for leaving, how I worried about how my family was coping without me. The therapist told me something that stuck with me: you can't pour from an empty cup. I had been trying to be everything for everyone for so long that I had nothing left for myself. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I found a job that respected my time and boundaries, and I started saving money to make my independence sustainable. I rekindled old friendships and met new people who accepted me as I was. I traveled alone for the first time, and standing on a beach watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Of course, there were setbacks. Sometimes I felt overwhelmed by loneliness or plagued by doubts. I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had abandoned people who truly needed me. But those moments passed, replaced by a stronger sense of self-worth and clarity. My family reached out sporadically. Some were hurt, others confused. Some accused me of betrayal, others begged me to come back. I listened, sometimes responded, but mostly I held my ground. I had to protect the fragile new life I was building. Over time, a few relationships began to heal, but only on my terms. I stopped chasing approval and started seeking authenticity. I learned that not everyone in my family was capable of meeting me where I was. Some held onto old patterns of control and guilt. Accepting that was painful, but necessary. In leaving, I discovered freedom not just from the constraints of family expectations, but from the invisible chains I had placed on myself. I learned to trust my intuition again, to prioritize my happiness, and to embrace my imperfections. Now, when people hear that I left my family and I am okay with it, they often react with shock or disbelief. But I don't apologize. I'm not okay with abandoning my past. I'm okay with choosing my future. I'm okay with loving myself enough to walk away from what was destroying me. This journey hasn't been easy, and it's far from over. But I'm no longer afraid to be alone, because I've found companionship in my own strength. I'm no longer afraid to say no, because I've learned that my needs matter too. I'm no longer afraid to be vulnerable, because I've seen the power of honesty and self-acceptance. Leaving my family was a radical act of self-preservation and love. It was the beginning of a new chapter where I am the author of my story, not a character in someone else's narrative. And for the first time in my life, that feels like freedom. I think the most surprising thing I learned after leaving was how complex love really is. For a long time, I equated love with sacrifice. The more I gave up, the more loving I believed I was being. The more I endured without complaint, the more worthy I thought I became. But that kind of love, the kind that demands your silence and strips away your sense of self, isn't love. It's control, it's fear masquerading as devotion. There were so many times growing up when I was taught that family came first, no matter what. That blood was thicker than water. That turning your back on your own was the ultimate betrayal. But what I've come to realize is that loyalty without boundaries becomes a prison. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is leave to break the cycle, to refuse to pass down pain disguised as tradition. I didn't leave to hurt anyone. I left because I was hurting. Because I was showing up every day in a life that didn't feel like mine. Because I had given so much of myself that I couldn't even remember what I wanted anymore. Now, I wake up and breathe without that weight on my chest. I make my own choices, even the small ones: how to spend a Saturday, what to eat, who to spend time with, and each one feels like a tiny act of healing. I don't walk on eggshells anymore. I don't brace myself for criticism disguised as concern. I don't second-guess my worth every time I speak. Sometimes I wonder what my life might have been like if I had stayed. Would I have numbed myself slowly, year after year, until I didn't feel anything at all? Would I have become resentful, bitter, angry at the world? Maybe. But I don't live in that life. I live in this one, the one I chose, even when it terrified me. There are still quiet moments when grief creeps in. I miss the laughter that sometimes bubbled up between the cracks, the shared history that no one else can understand. I miss the comfort of routine, even if that routine kept me stuck. But those feelings don't undo the truth. I had to go. Healing isn't linear. Some days I feel strong and certain, and other days I feel like a child all over again, mourning something I never really had: unconditional love. But the difference now is that I face those feelings. I let them in, sit with them, and then let them pass. I've started building a chosen family, people who don't try to mold me into something I'm not. Friends who check in not because they feel obligated, but because they genuinely care. People who don't keep score or shame me for my past. These connections are quieter, more intentional, but infinitely more nourishing. I've also learned how to be family to myself. I show up for me. I nurture the parts of myself that were neglected. I've become the parent, the sibling, the partner I always needed to me. That may sound strange, but it's incredibly powerful. For so long, I waited for someone else to love me the way I needed. Now I've stopped waiting. I do it myself. And with that self-love has come forgiveness, not for those who hurt me, necessarily, but for myself. For staying too long. For not knowing better. For making decisions I wasn't proud of. I forgive the version of me who didn't have the tools, the words, or the strength to leave sooner. I see them now with compassion, not judgment. Leaving my family wasn't an act of abandonment. It was an act of reclamation. I took my life back. I stopped living in a script written by someone else. I wrote my own beginning, and the pages ahead are blank, full of possibility. Do I miss what I left behind? Sometimes. Would I go back? No. Because for the first time, I don't just survive, I live. I laugh without guilt. I rest without shame. I love without fear. I am okay, more than okay. I am free. There's something strange about freedom, about the kind that comes after loss. It's not loud or glamorous. It doesn't come with applause or acknowledgement. It's quiet, steady. It settles into your bones. It shows up in the stillness of the morning, in the absence of anxiety, in that soft sigh you didn't realize you'd been holding for years. I used to think I would never stop feeling like the villain. That walking away from the people who raised me or relied on me would haunt me forever. But I don't feel like the villain anymore. I feel like a survivor. A human being who finally chose peace. Sometimes I pass by families at cafes or in parks and wonder what my life could have looked like if things had been different, if the love I gave had been returned in full, if I hadn't been cast into roles that demanded silence, compliance, endurance. But that kind of love, the kind I needed, wasn't available in the house I was raised in. And for a long time, I tried to build it myself from nothing. I gave and gave and gave, hoping that would teach them how to love me back. It didn't. That was never my failure. It just wasn't something they were capable of. And that's another painful truth I've made peace with. Some people, even those we love most deeply, may never be capable of giving us the love we need. Some don't know how. Some don't want to learn. And some think they are loving us, even as they diminish us, because that's the only version of love they understand. I had to stop punishing myself for what they couldn't give. When I left, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be whole again. But I didn't realize that wholeness wasn't something I needed to earn, it was something I needed to remember. I wasn't broken. I was buried. Buried under the weight of unmet expectations, of constant performance, of pretending I was okay. Now, I don't perform. I don't pretend. I don't shrink myself to make anyone more comfortable. I'm not perfect, I still have bad days, and I still carry some of the scars, but I'm real. And I'm present. And I'm finally enough for myself. There are people in my life now who only know this version of me, the version that left. That chose peace. that talks openly about boundaries and healing. And they often tell me how strong I seem. I appreciate that, but I don't always feel strong. I just feel honest. And maybe that's stronger than anything else I've ever been. It's taken years, but I've stopped checking my phone for missed calls or unread messages from people who never understood me. I no longer replay old arguments in my head, trying to rewrite them with better comebacks or gentler exits. I don't feel the urge to explain myself to those who made no effort to understand. I live my life now as it unfolds, not haunted by the past, but informed by it. I make my choices with care, not fear. I speak with a voice I trust my own. Leaving my family wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my becoming. And now, when I sit in my quiet apartment, sunlight pouring in through the windows, surrounded by books and plants and laughter, I don't feel alone. I feel home. Because I brought myself home, finally. And I'm okay with that. It's been a few years now. Time has softened some of the sharper edges of memory. Not erased them, no. The past is never truly gone, but dulled the pain enough that I can look back without flinching. There are even days when I can think of them, my family, and not feel the old ache rise in my throat. They've gone on with their lives. I hear bits and pieces through distant relatives or mutual acquaintances. Holidays, birthdays, illnesses, life moves forward whether we're watching or not. I don't interfere, and they don't reach out much anymore. The silence between us has become a kind of truce. Sometimes, I wonder if they ever look at an empty chair at the table and think of me. If they regret how things unfolded. If they ever question whether the version of me they clung to, the obedient, quiet one, was ever really who I was. Or if they've simply rewritten the story in their heads to make it easier to live with. That I was ungrateful, difficult, overly sensitive. Maybe that's the version they needed to believe to justify the silence. But I don't need them to understand anymore. I don't need their permission to heal. I've built something different now. A quiet, stable life. It's not perfect. But it's mine. The people I let into my world now, friends, chosen family, a partner who respects me for who I am, they meet me in the present. Not as who I used to be, not as what I could do for them, but as a whole, complicated person. I am loved without conditions. And I love back, fully and freely, without fear. I no longer measure my worth by how much I can endure. I no longer confuse being needed with being loved. I've learned that the truest relationships are built not on sacrifice, but on mutual respect. And most importantly, I've forgiven myself. For staying as long as I did. For bending until I broke. For not knowing how to leave sooner. I was doing the best I could with what I had. We all were. I still carry them with me in small ways. A song that reminds me of a sibling. A scent that evokes a memory of home. A recipe my mother used to make. But they don't hurt like they used to. They don't define me anymore. They're just threads in the larger tapestry of my life, no longer the whole design. There's something sacred about starting over. About taking back ownership of your story. For a long time, I thought the pain of leaving would define me forever. But it didn't. What defined me was what came next, the courage to build something new from the ruins. The resilience to choose joy, even when the path there was lonely. I wake up now and don't dread the day. I fall asleep without a pit in my stomach. I laugh more. I trust myself. I've learned to listen to that small voice inside, the one I used to ignore in favor of louder, harsher ones. That voice is my compass now. And when I think about the girl I used to be, scared, exhausted, trying so hard to be enough for everyone else, I feel nothing but tenderness. She made it. I made it. So yes, I left my family. And no, I'm not sorry. Because what I found in the leaving was myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Every so often, I get messages. Sometimes from people I used to know, distant relatives, old neighbors, even old friends who took sides when I left. The messages usually start with surprise, sometimes curiosity, and occasionally something colder, like judgment wrapped in politeness. They ask things like, "Do you ever miss them? Or have you thought about reconnecting, as if the passing of time naturally erases pain, as if healing means pretending nothing ever happened? I answer with honesty, yes. I miss what I wished I had. And no, I haven't forgotten. I've just made peace with it. There's no anger in those words anymore. No bitterness. Just clarity. The truth is, I've learned that longing isn't always a call to return. Sometimes it's just grief finishing its course. Missing someone doesn't mean you're meant to go back to them. It just means they mattered to you once. That's allowed. It's part of being human. These days, my life is quiet but full. I have routines I enjoy. I read more. I spend time with people who fill me up instead of draining me. I work in a field I care about. I've even started traveling, something I never felt free to do when my world was so tightly controlled. I send postcards to people I love. I cook meals that bring comfort. I laugh loudly. I cry without shame when I need to. I've become someone I genuinely like, someone I fought hard to become. And I think that's what so many people don't understand when they hear stories like mine. They see the leaving as the scandal, the betrayal. But they rarely ask what came before. The years of silence. The pressure. The slow erosion of self. The thousand small moments where you learn to disappear in your own life. Leaving wasn't the betrayal. Staying would have been. And so, I don't call it abandonment anymore. I call it return. Return to myself. To truth. To peace. If anyone from my past ever reads these words, I hope they understand something. I didn't stop loving you. I just started loving myself more. And for once, I listened when that love asked me to go. I wish you well. I truly do. But I'm not coming back, because I'm already home. And I'm okay with that. More than okay. I'm free.